Hi, today we're speaking directly to product owners and product managers, basically anybody who has a business responsibility for a software project or system of any kind, anybody who really works with outside developers or even internal developers. And hopefully, we can help you understand how AI has really changed the developer world and what expectations should be changing for you and how to kind of better manage developers in this world of AI and better understand what they do so that you can do your job better. My name is Paul Byrne. I'm the president of Razoyo. I have with me today William Byrne, who is the chief technology officer for Razoyo and takes lead responsibility for most of our software development projects. And I have Giancarlo. Giancarlo is a product manager. He used to be a developer, but he's a product manager in the Razoyo world. He actually works with a sister company called Refactored Group on a product called Automatic FFL. So I'm going to start by kind of throwing it to you, William, and asking, how has AI changed your world? Like, how has your job changed in the past 12 months as far as the implementation of AI is concerned?
Yeah, so I think AI is at the point where, you can't just ignore it as an engineering team anymore. I think I saw some figures that said that we are at roughly 75% adoption of developers that are using AI tools regularly in their coding workflow.
And that's
Um,
not at Razoyo. That's just in general, right? That's
That's just
just
in
in general.
general. Yeah, that's an industry spec. So yeah, the point being, like, I think the expectation is that engineering teams going forward are pretty much going to have to use AI. And it changes the job quite a bit. We're still kind of early in the adoption of AI into the software world. As software developers, we're used to managing change at a fast pace. But I would say, this is probably the biggest change that has hit since I've been writing code, which has been just a little over 10 years. It's changed the day to day of the job drastically. It's kind of turned around the role. 6 months ago, most of the code that was produced by me obviously was written by me. I would actually type out lines of code. If I'm trying to diagnose an issue, I would be reading the code, maybe adding to the code to produce some information that could be helpful. I do almost none of that on my own today. I would say, probably upwards of 95% of the code that I personally produced is produced using AI tools. And I think you're probably going to see that across the board. I think GitHub, and this is old, this was back in December, but GitHub did a pretty large analysis of the code that's hosted by them. And they estimated that AI wrote about 30% of the Python functions with US contributors. So most code is we're moving towards the place where most code will be AI generated. Now, that's not to say that the job that we've arrived at where software development is now automated. That's not what this means. You end up doing a lot of reviewing. You can't just blindly accept what the AI tools are cranking out. So it really shifts the job into I would say more of a reviewer role. Like, to use an analogy, instead of being a novelist, you now become an editor in chief. And so, yeah, like I think that's the biggest change is the day-to-day the type of day-to-day tasks that we are involved in has kind of changed from the mundane boilerplate setup to really like higher level thinking about implementing business requirements in a way that's going to be good for the project in the future.
Okay. So, how, if you were just to ballpark it, like how more efficient would you say? And I know it's a total swag because, we haven't really studied or measured this, but
Mhm.
after a year of experience, like where would you say you sit?
So that's an interesting question. I think I would say I would want to measure it to feel comfortable giving like an actual percentage
Yeah.
answer. I mean, and the reason I say that is because I've read a lot of interesting studies that are out there. And it's not uncommon for developers to believe that they're actually being more efficient, but when it gets measured, in some cases, it actually had the opposite effect and it made them slower.
Right.
So from everything I've seen, it's, the AI has the power to increase efficiency. But what I've noticed is it's all in how you use it.
Right.
So for example, there's a random controlled trial that METR ran on experienced open source devs working in their own repos. And it found that AI actually made them 19% slower. So there's,
Yeah.
but at the same time, there's other research that shows, 25, 30% increase in efficiency. And so I think if you
Right.
wade through all this information and really drill down to the question of why is the efficiency gain kind of all over the place, I think it's because it's how you're using AI. That's really the important thing to look at, and not just from an efficiency perspective, but also from a skills development perspective
Right.
as well. There was an Anthropic article that came out recently that was pretty interesting. They ran a trial on 52 mostly junior engineers that were learning a new Python library. And they basically compared the result of a group that was using AI versus a group that was not using AI. And the group that was using AI did finish more quickly. In this particular study, they finished 2 minutes faster. So not significant,
Right.
but 2 minutes faster.
Right.
However, they gave them a quiz on the Python library shortly after they finished the learning exercise, and the AI group actually scored 17% lower.
Yeah.
So all of this to say, I think what really is important is figuring out how to integrate AI tools into your workflow, how to make sure that as you're learning new programming languages, especially for the more junior engineers, that you don't sacrifice the absorption of knowledge by relying on the tool. And that's not to say don't use it, but again, it's how you're using it. So, me personally, I would pin it at a 25% increase in performance. That's unmeasured, obviously. So
Right.
I'd be interested. Maybe I need to look at that closer. But I feel like you can multitask a lot better, which if you are writing the code yourself,
Hmm.
you're pretty much going to have to hone in on what you're working on and kind of just focus on that until you complete it.
Right.
When you start introducing AI tools, it's not uncommon for you to have three or four things going on at the exact same time, and just to context switch back and forth between the different prompts, because there's a waiting period, obviously. AI has to
Right.
think. And so if you're just sitting there and you're waiting for that response, that's time that could have been spent making progress on something else. So again, all to say, it's all about how you use it. But I think if you apply the right strategies, it's a net win in terms of efficiency.
Okay. Yeah, that's a pretty good endorsement. I think what will be interesting is maybe if you talk to us a little bit about the tools you're using and how you're using them. As you mentioned, it's important to how you use AI as much as whether or not you are using it. In fact,
Mhm.
it's the critical piece.
Yeah, so there's various AI companies, there's various AI tools, and I have definitely not tried all of them. But what I will say is I've kind of landed exclusively on using Claude Code. I'm not saying it's the best, but I will say that a lot of the engineers that I talk to that seems to be the one that they prefer. It kind of changed the game in terms of coding AI agents. And it's a command line tool, so it's mostly developer friendly. There's not going to be a lot of people that are comfortable with the command line that aren't engineers.
Yeah.
But they've definitely built it out. So my tool set is Claude Code right next to the project that I'm working on, using it to read the code, write documentation, write tests. And then I've also, they released a Chrome plugin. So now you can launch Claude Code, you can connect it to your Google Chrome browser. And let's say if you're working on building out, a web page or something that involves a front end experience, now not only will it write the code for you, but it will also then open up Google Chrome, go through, a test of what it was supposed to do. It'll take screenshots, make sure that if you asked for the button to be on the bottom left, it's actually going to verify that it's there and it's not on the bottom right. And that's pretty much like the state of the tool set today that
Mm-hmm.
I use. I will say, like, Claude Code is a bit of an umbrella because there's multiple tools within that tool. So you have the Chrome extension, you have the ability to build out agents and skills. And so going back to what I was saying earlier, you're probably going to see a big difference between somebody that just picks up Claude Code and starts using just the general prompt to get their tasks done versus somebody that actually puts the effort in to learn how to configure things like subagents. And then, they're going to see a much bigger efficiency boost, I think. So,
Gotcha. Gotcha. No, that sounds great. Giancarlo, let's talk about your job a little bit. So you used to be a developer. Now you're a product manager, product owner. Um, you've always kind of been one to try out some of the newer tools. And so maybe you've been using AI for a little bit longer than, than the rest of us. But tell me, like, how that has changed your world as a product manager.
I would say that yeah, things are much more efficient for me. And yeah, as a product manager, you're kind of like you want results, right? Things are kind of results based. I mean, obviously you got to do things right, um, but yeah, you're always looking at the next step, the next thing to be released or the next thing that you can work on your next task there. So for me, I think the biggest thing is that I like the first time I noticed like wow, this is making a big impact on my work was yeah, like we had a period of low resources for developers and I also work on support, and so I'd have these support tickets come in and with some very specific issues. Now, a lot of the issues I'm able to diagnose myself, but some of these were ones that I would normally hand off to our developer. But we didn't have great resources for that, and so I was able to use AI to debug this issue and a few other issues that normally would have taken me hours, if not the entire day, to figure out what the issue was, either through some trial and error or through like digging through um, some of the code just with my like developer background, um, or even trying to recreate the issue myself so I can pinpoint where things are going wrong. Definitely some different avenues there, but yeah, with AI, I can kind of describe the issue, uh, have it come up with some, sometimes pretty creative, um, maybe some certain logs or certain things I can quickly use to debug and get to pinpoint what the issue is. And so now within 30 minutes, I'm able to provide a solution for our customer when normally that could have taken a day, could have taken you know, 2 days if it was really complicated.
So you do both.
Yeah, that
You do both support and feature enhancement, right? So
right.
so how has it affected the feature enhancement side of things?
So for the feature enhancement side of things, a lot of our app isn't necessarily, it's relatively small.
Hmm.
We're available on different platforms, and yeah, I think the thing that's been really nice is being able to, for certain tweaks, I can actually just have, Claude Code do it all for me,
Hmm.
and then I don't have to wait on a developer, for certain smaller things, and then yeah, and then I can test it and release it myself when, otherwise it's something I might need to wait a week for,
Right.
even if it is a smaller feature.
Right. And I guess so let's talk a little bit about your tool set. What tools are you using and kind of how are you using that? You mentioned Claude Code, but I know you're working with some AI in N8N and some other places that are kind of interesting.
Yeah, so that was another big win for me. Now, yeah, so yeah, we always use Zapier. I think that's pretty like industry standard.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was looking to develop a feature, an upload feature that would take FFL certificates. So yeah, these documents for
Right.
firearms dealers, and then get them analyzed, scrub the data and put that into a database somewhere, and then have our system be able to access it and have our customers be able to access it.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, same thing. During a time when we had low developer resources, and even with developer resources, I wanted a way to release this feature faster.
Right.
I didn't want it to take 6 months
Right.
to develop this system, because we wanted to make sure that we were doing it right. We wanted to make sure that it was something that was totally automated. Um, and so yeah, we N8N this past year, especially, people were starting to hear about it, and especially with the 2.0 release, yeah, it definitely had some buzz. And so I kind of learned how to use N8N for some smaller workflows, so somewhat familiar with it. But yeah, it's definitely less like non-developer friendly, and it's definitely a lot more technical than Zapier.
Right.
Takes some getting used to and some learning. And so through yeah, ChatGPT and Gemini, I was able to just use the chat features, with both of those tools to help me build this, fairly complicated N8N workflow, um, that I never would have, I mean, not never would have been able to do on my own, but it would have taken me significantly longer to figure out, what nodes to use and what settings in the nodes and how to authorize everything,
Right.
and how to connect everything, um, or what's the smartest node to use, especially like, yeah, just transferring data from one node to another or to a node down the line. Anyways,
Right.
just making sure everything was organized well. So that was, AI was a huge help for NAN for creating a workflow.
Yeah.
But then on the other side, we were trying to write as little code as possible. And so Gemini was a huge help for, allowing me to set up console or Google run or Cloud Run functions,
Right.
setting up buckets for storage, setting up pub sub.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, it's just all these different cloud tools that, like,
Right.
maybe I had somewhat touched once or twice, but definitely unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it described it to me in a way to make sure that I understood. I could ask any questions I needed. It's like a AI tutor.
Right.
So yeah, the cloud console can get pretty complicated. There's so many different options and settings,
Yeah.
and you can easily set something up and it just not work because you didn't do it right.
Right. And you got to set up guardrails so that you don't set something up that like you set up an infinite loop and it burns through your budget.
Yeah,
Things like that.
right. Yeah, that too.
So let me ask you this: like you've kind of used a few technical terms in this, but has it decreased your reliance on developers? And it sounds like the answer to that is yes, to a certain extent. Although it sounds like you're also kind of investing the improvements in just moving faster feature development, cleaning up, any issues with the software, addressing technical debt. Is that how you would characterize it?
Yeah, I definitely rely less on developers. I'm able to do more on my own.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and I think part of that is having somewhat of a developer background myself. But I think even without that, like through NAN, Google Cloud Console, like I think product managers without that background can still figure a lot of things out and come up with more creative and still very robust ways to accomplish what they're trying to.
Cool. All right, I'm gonna go back to you, William, real quick. So, uh, from a CTO's perspective, so you have an entire team that you manage. What is what would you say is like, and it doesn't have to be one, but what's like the biggest success or the biggest successes from AI? And then what would you say is the biggest AI failure you've seen over the past year?
Yeah, so biggest successes, I think, come from recognizing what AI does very well and kind of going pedal to the metal with that. So, for example, in any typical engineering team, you have bottlenecks. And one of those bottlenecks that is pretty typical is the code review process. You can have a big team of engineers, a good portion of them are probably going to be junior, just that's how it works out. And so, junior engineers are similar to AI. They can crank code out quickly, but it needs to be carefully reviewed. So one of the bottlenecks that we were able to help out with was with the code review process itself. So as an engineering team, the leads will no longer look at a pull request, which is just somebody submitting a change to a code base. The lead will not even look at it until it's passed through the AI code review. And so, again, the tool we use is Claude Code, but there's many options out there that you can use. And it will basically scan the changes made to the code. It'll take in contextual information that developers will sometimes include, like what the goal of the change was. And it will assess that for security issues, readability, maintenance issues, bugs, performance. So having that immediate feedback has been tremendous in making code ship more quickly. Because typically the process is the developer gets done with their task, they test it out on their environment, they'll submit the code change request, and then they have to wait for a lead. And if it's a junior developer, oftentimes it's gonna come back to them with some change requests in there. And so you end up having this cycle of developer that was working on the task sends it to the lead. The lead then has to make time in their day to review it. If there's issues, they send it back. And then we just go through that cycle all over again, over and over. And so having AI be that first line of defense in the code review process and catch the issues immediately just puts that dev right back on track in updating the code to make it acceptable so that it can finally ship. So that's one massive win, is just decreasing the feedback loop so that code can make it to your environment faster. The other big win is tests. So every good developer knows tests are required, right? They're going to be, anytime they're building a new feature, they're going to be writing
And here you're
tests
talking about like
alongside of it.
unit tests, programmatic unit tests.
Yeah, these are basically, if you write a function in whatever programming language, you want to and also write a function that tests it. So if I'm writing a function, and obviously this is oversimplified, but if I'm writing a function called add that takes two numbers and adds them together and returns the result, I'm also going to write a function called add test. And I'm going to feed the number 2 in there as the first argument, and then the number 2 as the second argument. And I'm going to validate that the number 4 comes back. So these are just functional tests that live along with your code. And, there's different mindsets about it. Some developers skip them altogether. I would never recommend that. Most developers recognize the importance of them. However, at the same time, we need to be practical. It takes time to write tests. And so I find that most of the developers in the organization, they'll go through the process of writing the tests. They'll cover, a couple of cases to make sure that the result is correct. But if they're writing a function that's complex where multiple things can go wrong and there's different states that could be possible, rarely will an engineer actually write every possible combination of scenario to make sure that the output validates. They'll pick a few key ones and then they'll submit it and skip the rest. With AI, the tediousness of handling every single use case just goes away because the AI is going to write those tests for you, and it's able to reason about what all the possible scenarios are, and it will make sure that every single one of those is covered in the tests. So what does this mean, right? What does this actually mean, having tests? Well, it means that your code becomes more resilient. So those tests are going to be what saves you in the future when you decide to ship a big new feature on top of a code base that's been around. It's big, it's complex. And we've all been there. A new feature breaks something else, right?
Yeah.
Well, the better coverage you have with tests, the more likely you are to catch that before you put it out in front of the users. So it just means a more resilient code base, that can adapt to change without causing users to get frustrated. So I would say another big win is definitely tests. And I'll throw one other one in there, which is documentation. It's another one of those tasks where, again, developers recognize the importance of it. They know they need to write documentation, but for whatever reason, that always ends up making it to the bottom of their priority list. Again, most will write it, but they're not going to be as thorough as, us leads or, other teams might like when we have to coordinate with each other. So AI solves this problem. You will probably not write documentation again as an engineer. You're just going to have your AI tool look at the code, look at the feature spec, and generate the documentation for you. So that means that at any given point in time, a code base is going to reliably be documented to the latest spec. And that's another problem. We will write documentation before AI, and maybe we do a great job writing the initial documentation, but then the code changes and that documentation needs to react to the changes in the code. And so things slip through the cracks. But when you have AI writing the docs, it becomes part of the code change process. And the AI knows that if it tweaks this function and it's in the mentioned in the documentation there, it's also going to update that for you. So I would say those are probably the 3 biggest wins. As far as failures go, things that AI doesn't do very well, sometimes the code that it generates is phenomenal, but rarely do you get to that point without some guidance from a developer. Like I said, it's almost like having a junior developer. So with the right guidance, with the right feedback, you can really get a good product from it. But without that, you have to be very careful. And so one of the things that we have drilled into the heads of our engineers is never blindly accept what the AI generates. The new premium skill is not writing code. It's catching when the code is wrong. And so that's something that we've kind of had to adopt in our workflow is just making sure that we're checking the AI code output to make sure it's wrong, because at the beginning, when it wasn't as well known, the risk of just glancing through what the AI generated but still shipping it, come to find out when somebody came back to look at some AI generated code that made its way out to production, it wasn't ideal. And so there was some refactoring that had to be done. So biggest failure, I think, was moving a little bit too quickly without enough review in the process. And that's something we corrected.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and
Other failure.
you had mentioned a couple of other failures to me that were more about like the AI. For example, we had a client that we worked with that was using AI in their DevOps pipeline and trying to automate that pipeline. And what they found out was that it really did not improve the efficiency of the developers, and overall, like, it kind of degraded developer experience, which is important for keeping developers motivated and the morale up. So I was thinking that was one, and then there was another failure where we had a client who was using the AI to generate email summaries of analysis that the application created, and that at some point it started spitting out garbage, and they didn't catch it immediately, and so they had to go back and kind of rework their system so that it would catch that particular problem, and and stop spitting out nonsense. Which was tough because they spent a ton of time testing it on like 25% of the data or 30% of the
Mhm.
data, right? But then once the AI burned through about 50 to 60% of the data, it just started, hallucinating and doing things. So, like, being very careful about running too fast because it fails in ways that I think are unexpected.
Yeah, I think in that particular case, it's not really a failure of using AI in your coding process.
Mhm.
Hallucinations happen, and all AI models acknowledge that this is a problem. But the difference that I would say is a hallucination that I have seen in the coding, like using AI to help build code, would be that it might think that the latest version of a particular library you need is actually one that was released 6 months ago. So it's just not up to date on the
Right. Yeah,
latest.
that's a big
Uh,
issue, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, so I would call that a hallucination. You might specifically ask for the latest version, and it's going to move forward with confidence, even though you can see that it chose a version that was actually outdated.
Yeah.
But the particular case you were talking about, this was a situation not necessarily about introducing AI into your coding flow, but this was about building a product, a feature that's backed by AI. And so what they were doing is they were looking at a large data set of numbers, BI data, and they wanted to send an email to their users that contained a summary of what they should do to react to those numbers. And so in that case, yeah, there were hallucinations, and it was bad. It was summarizing things that had nothing to do with the data itself. In fact, it was just like telling stories. So they revised, they put better guardrails in place. But I think that speaks to building AI backed products and kind of some of the things that you have to consider, and the safety guards that you have to put in place when you're doing that. Luckily, in the coding process, using AI to help you write code, I have not really suffered any sort of hallucinations that were that bad. Again, the worst thing that might happen is it might just tell you it might just attempt to write an ugly piece of code. You catch it, you explain what you want, and it does a pretty good job coming back with the right answer.
Right. Yeah. As long as you
Um,
treat it as a very iterative process and you're very careful in
yeah,
reviewing it, then you'll see that. Good.
yeah.
Good point.
Yeah, I think you treat AI like a junior
Yeah.
teammate, fast output,
No trust.
need some
Yeah.
supervision. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, speaking of your junior teammates, one thing you want to be careful of, they're all going to use AI as they should. but you don't want them to buy speed and sell understanding.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a great trade-off to make. So it really is getting into the granular details of how you're incorporating it into your flow. It has the ability to move you in a better direction, but it also has the ability to do some detrimental things to your org.
Right. Okay. Hey, Giancarlo, real quick, successes and failures.
So successes and failures. Um, I mean, yeah, what like definitely one of the big successes, kind of what I already mentioned, was that NAN workflow. That was definitely big for me. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, the biggest success is, I mean, efficiency has just skyrocketed. I mean, and honestly, like, yeah, it's made the job even more fun, which is great.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's exciting. It's very exciting to be able to, incorporate AI, and just like the amount that I've learned, even, like kind of like what William was saying, it's important to understand, what you're doing still. And so if you're using AI to explain things to you, and help you to learn, then I think like that's
Yeah, I think that's
very
a really important point. Like, it's really critical that, as William was saying, you don't trust it. You treat it like a junior, but also that you understand what it's done. That it's output, even if it works, even if it functions properly, and things look good. If you don't understand what it's done, then it's a problem, right? Like you want to, but the solution is, well, have AI explain it to you, right, and teach you what it did and why it did it. And you may disagree with that, and that may lead to more revisions of whatever it is you're working on. Do you have any failures? And when I say failures, I mean the sense of like, oh, you ended up just wasting a lot of time on something because you thought AI was going to help you and it didn't, or anything along those lines.
Yeah, so like a very specific problem that I've kind of been handing to AI to see what it's thought to help me come up with a plan was, so for our WordPress plugin, um, we yeah, so automatic FFL works great on the classic checkout, but with WooCommerce's new block-based checkout, it's a completely different system. Uses React, uses like it's a very different way to modify that checkout versus the classic one.
Right.
And so yeah, and I knew that, like, yeah, we should, if the block based checkout is the default for WooCommerce, like, we should be compatible with it. And I think our customers will appreciate the added value of being able to use like the fancier, newer block based checkout that WooCommerce has.
Right.
So over time, I mean, I think like even a year ago, I was asking AI like, hey, how do you think we should do this? Um, and I've probably gone through like 3 or 4 iterations every, 4 months or so. Um, and yeah, and it never was able to quite figure out a good plan. But yeah, as of recently with Claude Opus was able to actually, come up with something, and it was able to point to the documentation to back it up.
Right.
So
That's great.
yeah, failures with older models, um, where yeah, wasted some time looking into it, and then like having to put it aside for later.
Right. Very cool. Well, hey, thanks, guys. I know you're really busy, so I appreciate you taking time out and going over this. I know a lot of people who are involved on the business side of software development. You may kind of struggle with whether they should use AI or not use AI, where they should. It's one of the main reasons I wrote my book, Adapt or Die, the Real AI Playbook, was because I saw that there was a lot of confusion, a lot of fear, a lot of hype, honestly, and a fair amount of FUD as well in the in social media, or just being reported in general, even by kind of what you would consider reliable sources. And I know a lot of people are struggling with that. So I wrote that book. I encourage people to check it out if you've had any interest in this conversation today. And contact Razoyo if you have any sort of development project that you think you might be able to use our help on, or would just like to move faster in implementing AI in your business. Give us a shout. That's what we do for a living. So we look forward to talking to you. Thanks again, guys. Have a good one.
Bye.